now that we've seen how we can create new documents and new collections into our database using Mongoose and MongoDB, the next thing to look at is how do we read from our database? How do we perform what is the equivalent of find that we saw in the Mongo shell? Well, it's also pretty simple, and it's a lot simpler than this. All we have to do is tap into our fruit model, which you can effectively see as kind of your collection, right? This is going to be all of our fruits, and we're going to call the find function on it. Now, this find function can accept a callback, and that callback has two parameters. The first one is error, and the second one is whatever it finds back. So we can call it anything we want, but in this case, given that we're searching through our fruits collection to find everything, because we're not filtering, we're not querying anything, then what we'll get back is all of our fruits, right? Inside this callback, we can check to see if there was an error, and if so, we'll log the error, but otherwise, we'll simply just log the fruits that we found from the find method. So the full syntax looks a bit like this. We tap into our fruits collection through the fruit model, we call the find function on it, and then when that's completed, a callback gets triggered, and we have the possibility of having an error if anything went wrong with finding our fruits, but otherwise we would get some results back, which we've called fruits. And if there were no errors, then we simply just log all the results that we get back from our find function. Now, just before we run our app.js, unless you want to insert another 3 of these same fruits into our fruits collection, it's a good idea to comment out this part where we call the insert many function. That way we won't end up with the same fruits inserted into our collection many, many times, or at least every single time we run app.js. So let's head over to our hyper terminal, and let's hit Control-C to exit, and again run our node app.js. So now you can see that it's read into our fruits database, which is what we asked it to do here, and then it's performed that find function onto it. And because there were no errors, then it's logged all of the results that it found in that collection, which is basically all of our fruits. And these are living JavaScript objects, and they're all contained inside an array. So everything that we've learned so far about arrays and JavaScript objects now applies to our data in our database, which means that we can tap into its properties by using the dot notation or pass it around into different methods, and we can work with it in our app.js. So given that you know that this thing we get back called fruits is an array of fruit objects, each with their own properties such as name and rating, and each of those properties have associated values, then here's a challenge for you. I want you to use the for each loop that we learned about previously in the EJS challenge module, and I want you to loop through the array of fruits and to only log their names, so the names of the fruits. So if you were successful, then inside the console here, you should be able to see just apple, kiwi, orange, banana, without the rest of this data. Pause the video now and try to complete the challenge. Okay, so we know that inside here, we have access to an array called fruits. How can we loop through just any other array? Well, we would tap into the array, fruits, and then we would call the for each method onto it. And this for each method accepts a callback, and inside that callback, we have a single parameter, which is going to be each individual object inside the array. So when we loop through it, we're going to pick out each and every fruit out of the array. So we'll just call it fruit in that case, the singular form. And now inside our callback, we get to console log each fruit, and we get to tap into its name property through the use of the dot name. Now, through this little very short bit of code, we loop through our fruits array that we got back from our database, and for each fruit, we will console log the fruit's name. There's a lot of singular and plurals going on around here, so you have to make sure you know which one you're using when. Let's go ahead and delete that previous console log where we logged the entire fruits array, and let's run our app.js to see it in action. So let's again close our database connection with Control-C and then run node app.js. And you can see we now loop through our fruit array and we print out each and every name property. So we end up with apple, kiwi, orange, banana. And so you can imagine that inside our app.js now, we have the entire flexibility of working with JavaScript arrays and JavaScript native objects to tap into their properties, to pass them around into functions, and use them wherever we need them. Now, at the moment, you might have noticed that we have to keep closing our database connection with Control-C. This is because inside our app.js, we're not closing that database connection. We're keeping it open at the end. We open that connection when we call mongoose.connect, but it's also good practice to close the connection to our database once we're done with it in our app. Inside the method where we perform the last action we want to do with our database, which in this case is finding fruits inside the database, then once it's completed and the callback is being called and we have no errors, then what we can do is we can say mongoose.connection.close. So we call the close method on our Mongoose collection. And now if I rerun my app, so for the last time, use Control-C to exit out of our database connection, run node app.js, and you can see that once it's done performing the task I asked it to, which is to find all of the fruits inside the fruit collection, then log its names through this for each loop, then it's closed the connection and I don't have to use Control-C anymore. So this is good practice whenever you're working with MongoDB databases and Mongoose. Close the connection once you're done.